The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, Reverend Dr. J. Henry Buck, Jr. from Grace Baptist Church of Germantown, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we are present this morning by your grace and your mercy. We thank you for this privilege to be here to serve. We ask that in this most desirable times, that we can learn, listen, love, and lead as we ingratiate ourselves in the fervor and favor of your will. We petition the power of your wisdom as we seek to balance this republic through reconciliation. Share and show us how to love unconditionally, help without judgment, and encourage without regret. Allow the spirit of unity to shelter in this place and peace to enable us all. We thank you for we the people, regardless of partisanship or platform. Bless our courts and our military personnel. In closing, give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. In the sovereign name we pray, amen.
Amen. The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Carvale.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my honor to welcome the Reverend Dr. J. Henry Byers, Jr. from my district as today's guest chaplain. Reverend Buck is the senior pastor of the Grace Baptist Church, which has a rich history in Pennsylvania and the Germantown neighborhood. He has opened an early childhood development center to local parents, and he has created opportunity for many youth, as well as sending to date 5 students to study at Howard University. In addition, Reverend Buck started a pie company to help with employment for returning citizens. He is a proud member of Pi fraternity. I want to thank Reverend Buck for all that he does for our community and welcome him to the People's House. And I thank you, Reverend Buck. Thank you. You're back, Mr. Speaker.
The chair will entertain up to 5 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House and ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, justice that is not blind is not truly justice. Our courts, our law enforcement, and our laws have always strived to uphold that ideal. That is why it is so disturbing to see the whistleblower testimony that has been given this week. As we continue to investigate the business dealings of the Biden administration, his family, and associates, it continues to become clear that the president has pressured the agencies he's entrusted with overseeing into providing his family with special treatment and special favors to avoid the consequences of their unlawful acts. This isn't justice. It's time to put a stop to a 2-tier justice system that has flourished during Joe Biden's presidency. We must stand for the rule of law and condemn anyone who deliberately uses their position as a public servant for personal gain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to revise and extend my remarks and address the House for 1 minute.
Without objections. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Fred Teichert and celebrate his retirement from A. Teichert & Son, a construction company that his great-grandfather founded in 1887. In 1990, Fred led the creation of the Teichert Foundation, and through the foundation, he has greatly contributed to what Sacramento is today in his support of nonprofits in Sacramento and throughout California. Fred has been committed to making Sacramento a better place, particularly for our youth. Among his proudest achievements was serving as the founding president of the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Sacramento. His participation on the Child Abuse Prevention Council and countless education committees have served as constant reminders of his dedication to helping children succeed both in and out of the classroom. For his efforts, he has earned numerous community service awards over the last 30 years, including being selected as American Leadership Forum's Exemplary Leader of the Year and the Sacramento Metro Chamber of Commerce's Sacramentan of the Year. I want to extend my congratulations and thank Fred Teichert for his lifelong dedication to Sacramento. His commitment to our region will always be celebrated and remembered. I ask my colleagues to join me in celebrating Fred for his work and wish him the best in his next steps. Mr. Speaker, I yield.
For what purposes the gentlewoman from Iowa, I'll get it out, I'm sorry, seek recognition.
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My good friend, Senator Chuck Grassley, said it best when he said, "There is deeply rooted political infection in the FBI." We can see this rot play out every single day when the FBI decides who they will and will not pursue. They targeted parents who showed up to the school board meetings to hold their elected officials accountable and speak up for their children. They targeted pro-life Americans who exercised their First Amendment rights to peacefully protest and arrested them in front of their children. And they rushed to investigate claims of Russian collusion despite lapses and a bogus FISA warrant. And those claims were not backed up by the evidence. Yet, when dealing with Hunter Biden, the DOJ and the FBI chose to go easy on him and gave him a sweetheart plea deal, leaving him unlikely to go to jail. It must be nice. We simply lost confidence in the Bureau, and serious changes must be made by Director Chris Wray to root out favoritism and double standards so the American people can have faith in their institutions again. I would also like to wish my young friends Kurt and Kathy Haller a milestone 40th wedding anniversary. Happy 40th anniversary, Kurt and Kathy. With that, I yield back.
For what purposes the gentlewoman from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of rural families who work hard every day, play by the rules, and deserve the very same access to opportunity as every other American. Despite advancements in many other areas, our rural communities lag behind, underserved with bad cell service and internet service, fewer options for healthcare and schools, and insufficient investment for small businesses. No one should have fewer opportunities just because of where they live. I am working from all angles to beef up support for rural communities, from mental health support with my and Representative Finstad's Rural Wellness Act, to improving child care access with my and Representative Glusenkamp-Perez's bipartisan rural child care bill, to helping farmers with disabilities with my and Representative Molinero's agriculture accessibility bill, to connecting communities with investments they need with my and Representative Fishback's Investing in Rural America Act. I'm proud to work on a bipartisan basis with so many of our colleagues who share the understanding of how vital our rural communities are to all of our lives, and look forward to collaborating on this year's Farm Bill. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purposes, gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I think there's no doubt about the seriousness of the problem we've got. We have a cancer within, close to the presidency, that's growing. It's growing daily. Mr. Speaker, that's a quote from the Watergate scandal. But the American people are applying it to current circumstances in the White House. We have a laptop referencing the big guys getting his 10%. We have text messages stating, "My father is sitting next to me and you better pay up." I'm paraphrasing slightly. And despite statements from the White House on how there was no contact with business partners, we have pictures of them playing golf together and White House visitor logs. Mr. Speaker, we have bank records, lots of them, around 20, with tens of millions of dollars going to members of the president's family, including grandchildren. We don't know what they did for it. And recently, a bag of cocaine was found in the White House. Case closed. No one accused. No one found. Mr. Speaker, if this was a bag of anthrax, would that have been taken more seriously and solved? I think the answer is yes. The only reason there's any investigations taking place and oversight is because Republicans have majority in the House. I yield back.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
And revise my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I introduced the Cumulative Impacts Act to protect frontline communities by requiring the EPA to consider cumulative impacts of pollution and deny permits unless they can demonstrate that there is no harm will be done to the community, especially public health. It's ridiculous that our current permitting process do not account for all nearby sources of pollution. From Southwest Detroit to Dearborn South End, which is home to extreme concentration of corporate polluters, sits directly across from roads from schools, homes, and playgrounds. Our kids are being taught that this is normal. It's not normal, Mr. Speaker. From 48217 to Polton to Beneteau and the east side of Detroit, our neighbors across Detroit are forced to breathe emissions from dozens of corporate polluters like Marathon Oil, U.S. Ecology, Stellantis, Cleveland Cliffs, and so much more, all of whom routinely violate their permits because it's cheaper than following the law. Where pollution occurs is a policy choice, Mr. Speaker. It's environmental racism. Forcing regulators to analyze cumulative impacts of pollution and deny permits for facilities that endanger public health would be a revolutionary, transformative change that our neighbors who just want to breathe clean air. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, House Republicans are doing everything we can to investigate the politicization and weaponization of the federal government. In fact, the House Committee on the Weaponization of Government heard testimony from New York Post reporter Emma Jo Morris, whose reporting about Hunter Biden's laptop was censored by almost every social media platform in the country in coordination with the most powerful levers of the federal government to silence Americans' First Amendment rights to free speech. Let the record show that Ms. Morris's reporting was factual, as confirmed by multiple outlets after the fact, and that this egregious abuse of power was so serious and so detrimental to our free society that a federal district court has enjoined White House and government officials from communicating with social media companies for the purpose of censoring or suppressing free speech on their platforms. Mr. Speaker, these nefarious actions by the White House and federal government agencies are utterly shameful and frankly un-American and must never, ever happen again. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition?
Address the House.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, House Republicans have made it clear that they do not support liberty, justice, and equal protection of the law for all. Last week, the majority passed an extremist defense bill that bans gender-affirming and reproductive care for service members, guts support for our service members of color, and prohibits pride flags from being displayed in any workspace, common access area, or public area of the Department of Defense. But they decided that the homophobia and discrimination can't stop there. This week, the Republicans voted to strip critical funding to enhance career development opportunities, provide meals to low-income seniors, create affordable and transitional housing units for vulnerable populations in need, and more. These projects, led by Representatives Boyle, Presley, and Houlihan, were vetted months ago to ensure they meet the rigorous community project funding guidelines and are responsible uses of taxpayer dollars. So why were these projects denied? Because the recipients had LGBTQ in their name, and they serve communities that the other side demonizes daily. It's hypocritical, it's homophobic, and it violates the idea of liberty and justice for all.
Young lady's time's expired.
Back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, used to be California was a land of really good ideas and innovation, but the last 30 or so years it's the place where a lot of really bad ideas come and infect the rest of the country. This morning I'm talking about with pork production in this country, and California deciding that, well, we need to dictate to the rest of the country how it's done. There's not even that much pork produced in my home state, yet they want to dictate how it works. So a proposition passed says that you cannot use gestation crates for pork production. Well, this was actually in place, those are there to help piglets to not be squashed by their mother, but it's been interpreted to be something completely different. We need H.R. 4417, the EATS Act, in order to have pork production in this country that isn't dictated by some crazies in Berkeley and California that says we can't have you producing that. We've already went through this with eggs. What this will produce is shortages of eggs, shortages of pork, higher prices, and even possibly to the importation of it, because one state is trying to dictate and reach across state lines to all the others with its tentacles of its crazy ideas on how things should be done business-wise. What will stop them from banning oil and gas being used to produce things in other states? It'll keep going and going until we stop it.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Vermont seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today with a heavy heart. Vermont has experienced so much devastation. The images have been shocking. Our capital city completely underwater, small businesses, homes and rental units totally gutted, and thousands of acres of cropland decimated. Seeing my clearer than ever that climate change isn't coming, it's here. Disasters like this bring up so much trauma through Hurricane Irene. I want Vermonters to know that we, your congressional delegation, will be there as long as it takes. But we have a very long road ahead. With the support of our friends and neighbors, we will get through this together. That's what I've seen as I've traveled visiting communities, Vermonters pitching in and helping one another. But we cannot accept that what we do normal. We must continue to fight for climate action and climate resiliency to keep Vermont the state that we know and love. I yield back.
In Rule 18, the chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole start all the way up. Pursuant to House Resolution 597 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the state of the consideration of H.R. 3935. Will the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Carl, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 3935, which the clerk will report the title.
A bill to amend Title 49, United States Code, to reauthorize and improve the federal aviation and other civil aviation programs and for other purposes.
On the Committee of the Whole rose on Wednesday, July the 19th, 2023, Amendment number 75, printed in Part A, 118/147, offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, has been disposed of. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Resolution 597, I offer amendments in block.
unblock?
On block number 4, consisting of amendments numbered 60, 61, 85, 87, 88, 89, 91, 92, 93, 94, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, and 104. House report.
Pursuant to the House Resolution 597, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves, and the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Larson, will control 15 minutes each. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I rise in support of the bipartisan en bloc. This en bloc contains 17 amendments offered by my colleagues on both sides. Amendments that look to increase access to airspace for its users. It reinforces staffing levels and the availability of advanced technology for air traffic controllers, and further enhances runway safety at airports, along with a whole lot of other things that are in the en bloc. I thank my colleagues for their work on these amendments, and I'm proud to support this en bloc and encourage. I'd reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you. I rise in support of this en bloc. It includes a number of provisions that will improve the bill, including the proposal from Representative Manning, the Youth Access to American Jobs and Aviation Task Force, particularly on increasing access to information. A proposal led by Representative Rouser with bipartisan support to prohibit the Department of Transportation from purchasing drones from foreign adversaries, including Russia and China. A proposal led by Representative David Scott to increase the FAA's community. A proposal led by Representative Sherrill with bipartisan support for the FAA to study national security implications, free balloons, and technical feasibility of having an electronic emitter on board. A proposal from Representatives Thompson and Vasquez requiring the DOT to study the loss of commercial air service in small communities and providing recommendations for restoring that service. And a critically important proposal, Representatives Yakum and Titus, to ensure maximum air traffic controller hiring for the next 5 years. And I'd urge all members to support the amendment, and with that I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from reserved. Gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'd yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Yakum.
Gentleman's
work on this FAA reauthorization bill. It's been a bipartisan experience as well with working with Larson, Ranking Member Larson. Thank you as well for your work on my amendments. Yakum Amendment 100 in this en bloc. This amendment, which was developed in a bipartisan manner in partnership with my colleague, Representative Titus from Nevada, extends the requirement that the FAA take traffic controllers through the full life of the reauthorization. This summer, we've seen headlines, and I've heard from constituents, and some of you have even experienced delayed flights and the chaos that that can bring. One big reason is that we have 1,200 fewer than we did just 10 years ago. Hiring isn't keeping up with the attrition, and short-staffed facilities, overtime, and 6-day work weeks, which isn't sustainable for the controllers that we have. An Inspector General report recently, quote, lacks a plan to address the controller shortage. The American traveling public needs long-term commitment to maximum hiring of air traffic controllers, and Congress should require it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I urge my colleagues to support.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
The balance of the time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
5 minutes, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much to such an important bill. Chairman Graves and Mr. Larson for the great cooperation between both sides of the aisle. Mr. Speaker, Van Drew and Dr. Andy Harris requires the President or his designee to certify that offshore wind Atlantic planning areas will, quote, not weaken degrade, interfere with, or nullify the capability of relied upon by the FAA or the armed forces. It would also require that the DOT-IG conduct the sufficiency of projects in areas critical to air travel and national security. Many of us and likely deleterious ocean wind size of the Chrysler Building in New York off our coast. That offshore wind turbines create a dangerous and potentially catastrophic impact on both military and commercial aviation to save lives. Offshore wind development will affect some of the busiest airspace in the country, including areas surrounding Newark, major international airports, dozens of smaller airports, and several military and coastal facilities. Radar interference analysis from August of 2020 stated, and I quote in part, the research proposed and radar systems will generate interference to these radars under normal atmospheric conditions, and to continue the quote, wind energy installations on the Atlantic coast may impact land-based radar systems, close quote. The vulnerability study found that, quote, offshore wind turbines may pose unique impacts to systems given the difference ocean versus land, as well as the larger size of offshore wind turbines compared to wind turbines, close quote. As I would point out, relied on the Block Island wind farm off the coast of Rhode Island, whose turbines are 589 feet for installation off higher, approximately 1,000 feet. They're huge, and they will affect radar. Concerns over to us and to all of this commercial aviation, which is, again, the gist of this amendment. I have personally, Mr. Speaker, studies and assert that problems might arise can be, quote, mitigated. Really? And support my amendment. 2022 comprehensive study by the National Academy of Sciences found that, and I quote them, implemented, matured, or deployed. Additionally, the NAS found that wind turbines even radar, and that's therefore it leads to false images when vessels are traversing our oceans. Finland and Sweden projects due to objections from their armed services. And I quote, the military missile systems deployed in the northwestern coast of Taiwan. The low-frequency noise generated by the turbine to affect the reflected phased array radars need to detect signals of missiles or aircraft. That is very serious. This wall will make us, it'll inhibit our ability to see what's going on. And again, so much commercial aircraft, they need to have unfettered ability to no matter where wind by the president or his designee, and the due diligence that will require that offshore wind turbines trade or interfere relied on by the FIA is both prudent and it is absolutely necessary. And I thank the distinguished chair his block amendment.
Gentleman from Washington.
Reserve, please.
Gentleman from Washington reserves.
I'm prepared to close. I'll reserve my.
I recommend folks vote for this en bloc, and with that, yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To thank Ranking Member Larson, Garrett Graves, and the Ranking Member work on this too. Underlying bill is supporting the and so many more America's airport infrastructure, future of American. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Let's have it. En bloc amendment.
Mr. Chair.
Recording vote to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceed up here at once. Pursuit of the Clause 6, Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from, did I get that right? Right, okay. It is now in order to consider amendment number 76 printed. Pennsylvania seek, for what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek? Clerk will designate.
Report number 118-147, offered by Mr. Perry of Pennsylvania.
97, the gentleman and the member opposing each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment strikes Section 206 and 206, the sale of reserved N numbers for profit, or as the underlying bill, instead of a aviation industry such as serious staffing shortages, pilots, controllers, employees of the FAA, mechanics, etc., that are causing massive delays and cancellation. Congress feels the need to interfere with small business transferring and selling N numbers. For all are the clearly marked registration numbers for civil aircraft within the United States. And they're by, and it says N12345 on the tail. That is the N number. Itself it's inbound for whatever. Currently, small businesses have sprung up that reserve and sell these N numbers, providing air their desired N number, much like a vanity plate on a car, while allowing the private both the buyer and the seller. Otherwise, these transactions just wouldn't happen. Unless the plane owner seeks a number, they're able to get one of the 454,900 for reservation to get them right now for $10. None of that's changed. In other words, no one is forcing brokers unless selling these N numbers is not harming anyone. Instead, it's an innovative commercial venture not be interfering with and bothering itself with over the behest of private plane owners. Government overreach in America to continue. I urge my colleagues to stand up for the market and to protect contractual freedom and support.
Gentleman, Washington, seek recognition.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I claim the time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized.
And I would like to yield to the chairman of the full committee, Chairman Graves.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. Offered by to seek a more fair process in reserving aircraft N numbers, also known as the identification. Individuals from profiting from the sale or transfer of an N number that is otherwise sold, as is pointed out. So there are people and they use automated software. And what that does is if you're making a transfer, if you buy a different airplane, you want to keep the same N number and you're making it transfer. In many cases because of the automated software, and then they hold hostage that particular N number and offer it for sale for thousands of dollars, depending on what the N number is. Now, as was pointed out, freedom of enterprise. We're interrupting freedom of enterprise. Illegal, but if you use the logic, why would the government interfere in somebody just trying to have the freedom of enterprise when it comes to pirating or anything else for that matter that's illegal? It's just individuals trying to make a living. It's flawed. We need. And with that, I would yield back the balance.
Gentleman from Washington. Sorry, I've got a gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chairman of the full committee and his perspective on this. And nobody likes the pirateering either, or maybe the abuse, so to speak. Allow it all together. If this is such an egregious, we can handle the software issue directly without destroying an industry, the buyer and the seller. And quite honestly, I don't know how many of us that have bought and sold a car and transferred the license number and said, oh my goodness, if I don't have the same license number, well, I can't sell the car. I'm not really worried about the license number. I just need to be able to drive the car. So if it's such a problem, why don't we just address that portion of the problem and not cut everybody out of the deal without a reserve?
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that I could add much to Chairman Graves' comments. He's clearly a leader, if not the leader, on aviation in this Congress, has more expertise on the vagaries of the airplane market, the general aviation airplane market, and I stand behind his comments. And but I do want to address a comment made earlier to you, Mr. Speaker, by the proponent of the amendment, and that was this: that the implication that this bill seems to be only about this issue, and when we should be dealing with air traffic controller staffing or pilot staffing or manufacturing. I've said that this bill is not about issue A, issue B, or issue C. This bill is a whole alphabet of issues that we have to deal with at the FAA. And in fact, this bill does address air traffic controller staffing by requiring the FAA to staff up to the maximum number according to the staffing model that the FAA has. It makes investments in the aviation workforce with the Aviation Workforce Development Program to increase the amount of talent in the pipeline for pilots, for maintenance workers, for manufacturing workers in aviation. It makes critical changes and improvements to accessibility for people who are wheelchair bound or need to use mobility aids when they travel. To imply this bill is only about one issue in this particular issue is not an accurate description at all of this legislation, nor of the work of the full Transportation and Infrastructure Committee to bring this bill to the floor to get the FAA reauthorized. And I wanted to be sure that that goes on record as part of this debate, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I close, I acknowledge that the bill is not only about this issue, but the pressing issues that we have, the ones that you already talked about. I would say that I think the bill could do a lot more on those issues, and those are the things that are concerning the American people, from safety to access to canceled flights. And I would tell you that it's great, I guess, that we're mandating the FAA do something. We're usually mandating the American people have to do something. We're mandating that the FAA fully complement controllers. But that doesn't mean controllers are coming out of school. That doesn't mean controllers want to take the job. You can mandate it all you want. But if the people aren't willing to do the job or aren't available to do the job, they're not going to be there to do the job. So I see that as a wholly inadequate response and solution to a pressing problem that I predict is going to get worse between now and the next 5-year reauthorization. With that, I urge adoption of this amendment. I think it's a good amendment. And if we've got to deal with the other problem directly, then let's deal with the other problem directly of the software and not punish everybody. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance.
Gentleman yields the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Could I inquire how much time I have left of my 5 minutes, Mr. Speaker?
Has 1.5 minutes remaining.
I'll yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, the other Representative Graves from the committee.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank my friend Congressman Rick Larsen for yielding. Mr. Chairman, yesterday I had the chance to talk about this legislation and talk about the fact that there has been an input process that has gone on for well over a year, that this legislation is in excess of 840 pages and has achieved numerous bipartisan wins, things that are advancing aviation safety and aviation industry in the United States. There are a number of people behind the scenes that have put tremendous hours of blood, sweat, and tears in this bill, and I just want to take a minute to thank folks like Hunter Presti, Laney Copeland, Julie Devine, Chris Sen, Andrew Giancini, Will Moore, Jack Ruddy, Corey Cook, Abby Wink, Leslie Parker, as well as Brian Bell, Alex Minardi, Liz Foro, Adam Weiss, Kathy Diedrich, and Stanton Johnson, as well as our own Deputy Chief of Staff, Maggie Airy, for all of the work that they did to put this legislation together. I want to remind this body, Mr. Chairman, that this bill passed out of the House Transportation Committee on a unanimous vote, and I'll be the first to admit, certainly there's some imperfections, and my friend from Pennsylvania believes that he's identified one. But this legislation is really just a tremendous step forward for the aviation industry in the United States, and I want to thank again Mr. Larsen, Sam Graves, who did an amazing job, as well as Congressman Cohen for the partnership on this bill. Yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor say yea. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the yea have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman
I'd
from
ask
Missouri.
for recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania will be postponed. Okay. It is now in order to consider amendment number 77, printed in Part A of House Report 118-147. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I've got an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 77, printed in Part A of House Report number 118-147, offered by Mr. Perry of Pennsylvania.
Pursuant to the House Resolution 597, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, and a member opposing each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think many of our constituents have a high opinion of Washington, D.C. bureaucrats, Congressional staff spends hours helping constituents just get a human being on the telephone to get answers from agencies like, I don't know, Social Security or the IRS. A recently released GAO report showed that 17 of the 24 federal agencies in GAO's review used an estimated average 25% or less of their headquartered building capacity in a 3-week sample period, which means 75% of the building was empty. These are headquarters, to be clear, not field offices in the middle of nowhere. This is where the people are, generally speaking, in Washington, D.C., actually. The Republican conference has undergone a concerted effort to ensure that these bureaucrats actually do their work in the office. In the first few weeks of this Congress, we passed the Show Up Act, which passed the House on a bipartisan basis with all but one member of the Republican conference and 3 Democrats that would simply require agencies to reinstate the telework policies in effect on December 31st of 2019 and require approval of OMB for further expansion of telework policies. This bill as written allows the FAA to implement out-of-control telework policies for FAA employees during a time when workforce issues, both at the FAA and in the aviation industry broadly, are hindering the efficient movement of the flying public. In my view, this is an unwise and is in the exact opposite direction that we should be going. This amendment applies the policies of the Show Up Act to only the FAA. This is common sense, upon which the House has already voted and voted in a bipartisan, overwhelming basis. With that, I urge support, and I reserve the balance.
Reserves. For what reason does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I claim the time in opposition to the amendment offered by Representative Perry.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chair, as the gentleman from, as Representative Perry knows, he is showing great leadership on the subcommittee as part of the T&I committee that oversees public building use, economic development, and emergency management. And we had a hearing, in fact, last week with a couple of witnesses to discuss the very issue of office use space with the General Services Administration. And there's quite a bit of agreement on the committee right now about the fact that we have a problem of empty office space, and there's not a good alignment between the use of the space and telework policies. And we are trying to get the GSA, General Services Administration, to take a look at that hard and come up with a better balance. And Representative Perry is leading that effort, and I congratulate him for that. It is because of his leadership on that, we have some bipartisan agreement on approaching that issue. That said, the FAA telework policies that are under fire from this amendment, existed prior to COVID-19, and they exist today. The FAA itself is, as many agencies are, trying to find that new balance post-COVID. And I continue to support the agency's ability to establish and revise as needed their common sense telework policies. We've achieved a bipartisan common sense approach to dealing with and overseeing FAA telework coming out of this pandemic. And so I urge folks to reject this amendment, which will take us backward. Section 802 of the underlying bill addresses the core concern that Representative Perry has presented in this amendment, that the FAA should review the agency's telework policies. The underlying bill ensures FAA considers its review, aviation safety, employee training, global leadership of U.S. aviation, and performing oversight responsibilities. So creating additional burdensome requirements on the FAA as contemplated by the amendment to get OMB approval for any telework policy change is burdensome and will hinder FAA's ability to adapt in changing conditions. This bill is already giving the FAA a lot of things to do. It doesn't make sense to give them more to do when they're already essentially trying to get done what the spirit of the bill, the underlying bill, is asking it to do. This amendment would also undercut the FAA's existing collective bargaining agreements and force it to take up valuable time renegotiating these agreements when it should be focusing on critical safety work. Additionally, the amendment degrades the FAA's ability to create a competitive workplace to sort of match what's going on in the private sector so we can attract people into the FAA, attract new talent. So for these reasons, Mr. Chair, I'm opposing this amendment and encourage my colleagues to do the same. But I maintain my commitment to working with Representative Perry in his role as the chair of the subcommittee to continue looking at how we can get the GSA to best balance the use of federally owned office space and lease space with the federal employee workforce. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I thank my friend for his comments regarding our work in the subcommittee, and now yield 2 minutes to my good friend from Virginia, Mr. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud to rise in support of the amendment offered by my friend from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, appropriately titled the Show Up Amendment. I mean, isn't that the minimum standard? Show up, come to work, especially when you're on the federal dole paid by the taxpayer? This amendment would ensure that the staff at the FAA do what most Americans probably assume that they're already doing and actually go back to work. It requires the FAA to comply with the Show Up Act. The problem, as Mr. Perry has already mentioned, with these federal agencies, you ever try to get a passport recently or a visa recently, need help from a federal agency? The employees are not at work. The Show Up Act was already passed with bipartisan support earlier this Congress, and this common sense amendment requires agencies to return to the policies that were in place as of December of 2019, just 3.5 years ago. It also stipulates that agencies may not arbitrarily expand telework policies unless the Office of Personnel Management deems that it would have a significantly positive impact on the agency's mission. It's hard to imagine how that would truly be the case. Removing the FAA's ability to perpetuate its current relaxed telework policy simply puts the FAA on the same footing as its counterparts in the private sector and requires those federal employees to do what civilians they are purportedly there to serve are required to do: show up to work every day. The China virus has long dissipated, and it's time for the FAA employees to resume their normal workday, their duties in the office, and it's ridiculous that we got to try to force this to happen. Give you some stats. An October 2022 survey by the OPM of 558,000 federal employees revealed that 20% never report to a physical office, while 46% come to the office some of the time. Unfortunately, unions like the American Federation of Government Employees, which should be illegal, by the way, for a government union, but they're fighting to keep America's federal employees at home permanently. Another survey from the OPM found that 80% of managers in federal agencies report that they're managing a poorly performing staff.
I yield the gentleman as much time as he will consume.
80% of federal managers report that they are managing a poorly performing staff, and it's nearly impossible to take actions like demoting or firing them, thanks again to the government unions. This problem is even worse when you consider a May Federal News Network survey, which showed that only 80% of federal employees are coming into work, 8% every day. Mr. Speaker, what is it when there's an unfortunate incident that happens at the FAA, we need these FAA employees on site, ready to respond, to do everything to remediate the situation. My constituents go to work every day. Mr. Chairman, your constituents go to work every day. They don't want to pay the salaries for federal employees who don't have to show up to work. Again, it's hard to believe we have to have an amendment to require this, but this amendment should pass, and I hope all my colleagues will support it, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I yield.
Gentleman from Washington, recognized.
Thank you. How much, may I request how much time I have left?
1 3/4 minutes remaining, to be precise.
Do the math. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, I just want to be clear. I think government unions should be legal. They are legal in the United States, and I'm very pleased that they're legal, so those unions can represent the women and men who go to work every day on behalf of the taxpaying public to do their job in service. And in that vein, too, there's no indication that FAA employees are en bloc not showing up to go to work. They may not be going to the workplace because we have telework policies in place. That does not equate, it does not equate to people not doing the work that we ask them. In fact, this bill, the FAA reauthorization bill, the Securing Growth and Restoring Leadership in the American Aviation Act, asks the FAA to do even more to improve the already gold standard that we have in U.S. aviation in the United States. We're giving the FAA employees plenty to do, and our committee will commit to ensuring that FAA does just that through our oversight responsibilities. With the remaining time I have left, I do want to thank the chair of the full committee, Sam Graves, for his leadership to get us to this point. We are on the verge of passing a comprehensive, bipartisan, negotiated in good faith, important policy-based bill, I presume in a bipartisan manner, which may not make the news because it wasn't exciting enough for the news, but we have prided ourselves on being a boring committee, on a workhorse committee, just trying to get our work done. And Sam Graves, in my view, deserves all the credit for that work and the great work of his team to make that happen. And I would like to thank the team standing behind me on the committee staff for their work to help as well make this happen, a critical part of ensuring that we got to this point today. Should we pass this bill, we have some work to do as well with the other body and the White House, but I expect that we'll do that. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time, which I think is now 0.
Thank you. The question on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The gentleman from Washington.
On that, I'd like a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further procedures on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania will be postponed. The chair understands that there's an amendment number 98 will not be offered. Do what now? Yep. Pursuant to the clause Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed by Part A, the House Report 18-147, on which further proceedings are postponed in the following order. Amendment en bloc number 4 by Mr. Graves of Missouri. Amendment number 76, Mr. Perry of Pennsylvania. Amendment 77, Mr. Perry of Pennsylvania. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time of any electric votes after the first vote series. All right. The unfinished business of the required for a recorded vote on the amendment en bloc number 4, printed in Part A of House Rule Report 118-147, offered by the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesign the amendment en bloc.
En bloc number 4, consisting of amendments numbered 60, 61, 85, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, and 104, printed in Part A of House Report number 118-147, offered by Mr. Graves of Missouri.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for the recorded vote will rise and be counted. A significant number has risen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote in an electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 348, the nays are 57. The amendments en bloc are adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 76, printed in Part A of House Report 118-147 by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 76, printed in Part A of House Report number 118-147, offered by Mr. Perry of Pennsylvania.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 64, the nays are 329. The amendment recorded vote on amendment number 77, printed in Part A of House Report 118-147 by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 77, printed in Part A of House Report number 118-147, offered by Mr. Perry of Pennsylvania.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 192, the nays are 221. The amendment.
Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin votes no. Ms. Stansberry. Ms. Stansberry votes no. Ms. Salazar of Florida. Ms. Salazar of Florida votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Georgia. Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams votes no. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions votes aye. Mr. Van Orden. Mr. Van Orden voted aye. Ms. Lofgren. Ms. Lofgren votes no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 195. Finally, the nays are 226. The amendment is not adopted. There being no further amendments under the rule, the committee rises.
Yeah, what do I got? That's all I have to say. Mr. Chairman, that's my line. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 3935, and pursuant to House Resolution 597, I report the bill back to the House with sundry amendments adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
Yes, sir. So from the top, that's right. Okay. The chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has under consideration the bill H.R. 3935 and pursuant to House Resolution 597 reports the bill as amended by the resolution back to the House with sundry further amendments adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. Is a separate vote demanded on any further amendment reported from the Committee of the Whole? If not, the chair will put them in gross. The question is on the adoption of the amendments. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. The question on engrossment and the third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend Title 49 of the United States Code to reauthorize and improve the Federal Aviation Administration and other civil aviation programs and for other purposes.
The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed, and without objection, the
Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
I'd ask for the ayes and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 351 and the nays are 69. The bill is passed without objection. A motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask unanimous consent that the clerk be authorized to make technical corrections in the engrossment of H.R. 3935 to include corrections in spelling, punctuation, section numbering, and cross-referencing, and the insertion of appropriate headings.
Without objection. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 11 a.m. on Monday next.
Without objection. The House will come to order.
The House will be in order. Chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Chesito's Latin Cuisine, a restaurant in Pooler, Georgia, for being featured on Guy Fieri's hit show, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. The owner of the restaurant, Chaz Ortiz, came to Savannah over 10 years ago and has been bringing Puerto Rican culture and flavor to our district ever since. Chaz's restaurant, which takes traditional family recipes and puts a twist on them, has been a crowd favorite at local venues like the Doggy Carnival Festival in Forsyth Park for years. In 2016, the restaurant grew from a fleet of 2 food trucks to a fully functioning brick-and-mortar store, demonstrating the success of small businesses in Savannah and the growth, hard work in Patient Springs. Chesito's honor marks the second time a restaurant from coastal Georgia has been featured on Guy Fieri's show. The first was on Tybee Island. We're extremely proud of Chaz, his entire staff, and the business he and his family have grown. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio rise?
Unanimous consent to address the House for a minute and to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to recognize Jayla Atkinson, a junior from Stowe Monroe Falls City High School, as the champion of the week for Ohio's 13th Congressional District. Jayla recently won the Division I state title in the 800-meter race with a winning time of 2 minutes and 10.74 seconds. Jayla's win highlights the importance of perseverance and the will to win because last year, Jayla finished second in the 800-meter state meet, but she did not quit. After a year of training hard work, and dedication, Jayla came back stronger than ever, bringing the Division I state title back to Ohio's 13th district. Jayla is truly an exceptional athlete, and her achievements made her family, teammates, coaches, and community proud. Once again, congratulations to Jayla Atkinson on her Division I state title, and best of luck in your future competitions. Thank you for making the birthplace of champions proud. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, today is a great day for public safety, and I want to take a moment to thank my colleagues for passing my amendment in this year's FAA reauthorization package. 14 years ago, we tragically lost 49 lives when Colgan Air Flight 3407 crashed near Buffalo in Clarence, New York, due to pilot inexperience. This prompted Congress then to strengthen requirements for pilots to ensure that something like this never happens again, and it's worked. Since then, there's not been a single commercial airline crash in the United States of America. One of those enhanced safety measures required 1,500 hours of in-air training for pilots. The rigorous training and experience practice gained during those hours ensure that pilots are well prepared to handle emergencies, adverse weather conditions, and any unforeseen challenges that might arise during flight. Our amendment protected the integrity of the 15-hour flight requirement and maintained safety standards that passengers and crews have come to expect. I'm grateful for the support and the work of Representatives Higgins and Tenney and all of my colleagues who stood behind that rule in this year's FAA reauthorization package. And more importantly, I'm proud to honor the memory of those lost in Flight 3407 and the tragedy and the families that have fought for these standards. And I yield back, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Vermont rise? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of my bill, Ensuring Fairness for Family Farmers Act. Crop insurance is one of the best tools farmers have against bad weather, natural disasters, and volatile markets. Unfortunately, specialty crops consistently lag behind commodity crops in coverage levels, and small farms are less likely than large farms to have crop insurance. That's why I'm introducing the Ensuring Fairness for Family Farmers Act, a bill that would incentivize crop insurance agents to cover small and specialty crop farmers like ours in Oregon. More than 33% of all Oregon farms are small farms, compared to 13% of farms in the U.S., and my growers have been clear about the challenges the current system creates for them. As we write the Farm Bill, Congress has a rare opportunity and a responsibility to ensure small family farms have their interests prioritized by giving them the tools they need to remain in production. Let's save the family farm. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize July 20th as National Pennsylvania Day. Pennsylvania gained the nickname the Keystone State because Thomas Jefferson referred to the Commonwealth as a keystone of the federal union for our role in the establishment and the success of the United States. Our Commonwealth is where the Declaration of Independence was signed, our Constitution was written, and our flag was born. It also served as the first capital back in the early days of our Union. Pennsylvania is a site of famous battles, such as the Battle of Valley Forge during the Revolutionary War and the Battle of Gettysburg during the Civil War. In Pennsylvania, we're proud to be home to the first hospital, superhighway, and commercial oil well, the Drake Well, in my district. We're also proud to have invented the Slinky, Little League Baseball, the steam engine, and bubblegum. All throughout history, our steel and coal mines, from our steel and coal mines to our farms and forests, Pennsylvania has led the way with an inspiring work ethic. As a lifelong Pennsylvanian, I'm proud to all we've done and look forward to our future, and I'm proud to represent nearly 1/3 of the landmass of our great Commonwealth. To all Pennsylvanians, happy Pennsylvania Day. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to rise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the United States is experiencing a maternal health crisis. This country has the highest maternal mortality rate among all developed nations, disproportionately impacting women of color, women in rural areas, and low-income women. Yet, according to the CDC, 60% of these deaths are preventable. That's right, 60% of maternal deaths in the U.S. are preventable. That is unacceptable. Healthy mothers and healthy babies must be a priority for this country. That's why I reintroduced my Advancing Maternal Health Equity under Medicaid Act so that all people with Medicaid coverage can get the access and the care they need during and after pregnancy. I encourage all my colleagues to support this critical legislation to help reduce the stark racial, ethnic, and income-based disparities in health care outcomes and save lives.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the life and honor the legacy of Ernestine Racklin, who recently passed away at the age of 95. The youngest daughter of Ernest and Emma Morris, Ernestine was born and raised in South Bend, Indiana. Ernestine made it her life's mission to make her home community a better place to live, work, and raise a family. Ernestine was a trailblazer, taking on roles and responsibilities like few women before her. In addition to chairing First Source Bank, Ernestine was the first woman to serve on both the Notre Dame Board of Trustees and the Board of the United Way. She was a strong supporter of the arts, devoting her time, talent, and treasure to countless projects in the South Bend, Mishawaka area. Above all, Ernestine was a leader who loved her family and possessed a unique ability to rally people around causes greater than themselves. The sheer number of remembrances that have come in since her passing just goes to show you how many lives Ernestine touched and the people that she shaped for the better. I know Ernestine's family misses her during this deeply difficult time, but I also know that they do not grieve like those who have no hope. And they take comfort in knowing that they will one day be reunited with Ernestine for all eternity. May God bless Ernestine Racklin. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to recognize the historic grand opening of the Cincinnati Black Music Walk of Fame. Thanks to the work of Hamilton County Commissioner and President of the Commission, Lisa Reese, the Black Music Walk of Fame is a one-of-a-kind interactive tourism attraction that will celebrate the untold stories and legacies of artists from Southwest Ohio, attracting families from across the region, country, and globe. Cincinnati is home to many transformational black artists, from Otis Williams to Bootsy Collins to Penny Ford. Thanks to the dedication and tireless effort of President Reese, these artists will forever be honored on the banks of the Ohio River for all to see. The Black Music Walk of Fame will inspire future generations of artists as well as drive tourism and growth. It is my honor to represent such talent and passion. Congratulations to President Reese and to all of those who have worked so hard to transform this vision of the Black Music Walk of Fame into reality. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and then to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise today to encourage Congress to continue investigations into potential criminal conduct by President Biden or his family. The web of deceit that is being spun surrounding this issue must be unraveled, and House Republicans are doing just that. Yesterday, House Oversight heard from 2 credible IRS whistleblowers with knowledge of the Biden criminal investigation. According to the whistleblower, Hunter Biden and his associates raked in a total of $17 million from China, Romania, and other sources between 2014 and 2019. Knowing whether or not President Biden has been compromised or targeted by foreign actors is critical to our national security. I urge my colleagues in the House to continue the investigations and pursue all reliable evidence. The American people deserve truth, transparency, and answers. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I stand today to reinforce the importance of the reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Act, the FAA, because it is particularly important to realize that to move this nation, we must make sure that we protect our passengers and our flight crew. Besides almost the $4 billion in airport improvement dollars and plus more, in addition to reinforcing the training and the protection of our crews, reinforcing the pilot's door, making sure that we have diversity and reach out to all over the nation to build the aviation industry by reaching out and training new pilots, and as well ensuring that passengers are dignified or treated with dignity and have the respect of airlines. This is a bill that should have the ability to move forward out of this House, but I am unhappy about how the pilots were treated in terms of their opposition to the raising of the age. I will continue to work with the Senate, the other body, to ensure that we listen to our pilots. I listen, and I hope that we will finally have an FAA bill, the Federal Aviation Agency bill, that will really be securing growth, robust leadership in the American aviation community. We must respect our pilots. They get us off the ground. They get us to our destination, and they get us back on the ground. We'll work with you and continue to fight for your issues. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition?
Seek to address the House for 1 minute or revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
China is plotting a government-backed digital currency which will use to survey and manipulate financial activity of its citizens and to crack down on dissent. A central bank digital currency known as the digital dollar poses significant privacy and government surveillance concerns. Republicans have been clear that the Federal Reserve does not have the authority to issue a digital dollar without an act of Congress. The United States shouldn't have the ability to build and test one behind the scenes either. Right now, the Federal Reserve is contracting with the private sector to build digital dollars far beyond what would be considered traditional research. That's why I introduced H.R. 3712, the Digital Dollar Pilot Prevention Act, to close this loophole. Make no mistake, government-backed digital dollars are not about innovation. They're about control. We must stop the Fed's current development dead in its tracks, and my legislation does exactly that. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks as needed.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of a bill I authored that is included in the FAA package to research severe turbulence and the impact of climate change on flight forecast. Turbulence is the top cause of injuries to both passengers and crew. My bill improves the FAA's understanding of turbulence to better inform safety measures for flight crews and the flying public. Last month, a scientific study analyzed 40 years of high-quality atmospheric data. The researchers found severe clear air turbulence increased 55% from 1979 due to climate change. Further, other recent studies have shown that turbulence will increase significantly as the climate changes, with the most severe turbulence increasing by 149% over the next several decades. We should all be concerned about the rise of turbulence and the projected increase in the years ahead. Unfortunately, scientists and researchers have reported their difficulty in calculating turbulence due to limited data coverage. That is why the FAA needs better tools and research to address passenger safety amidst this threat to air travel. The FAA research we support today means that tomorrow Americans will fly safer. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Recently,
Speaker McCarthy stated that if the Department of Justice can prosecute Donald Trump, then, quote, they can do that to any American, end quote. Speaker McCarthy is absolutely correct. If the Department of Justice can prosecute Donald Trump for unlawfully retaining top secret classified documents that put American lives at risk and sharing those documents with random people, then yes, the Department of Justice can prosecute you for unlawfully retaining top secret classified documents and sharing them with random people. Because you are not above the law, and neither is Donald Trump.
Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
And to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise as the representative of the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District, which is home to Boston Logan Airport, critical to our economy, for travel, a job engine, and it has created a number of quality of life issues for those who live in proximity to it. As a proud member of the Congressional Quiet Skies Caucus, I wanted to talk about what these constituents are experiencing, and they write my office daily about living proximate to the nation's one of the nation's busiest airports. Loud air traffic starting in the early morning hours and lasting until midnight, adverse health effects exacerbated by interrupted sleep, aircraft noise, air pollution, it's all taking a toll. That's why I support provisions in the FAA bill that invest in noise abatement, clean energy, and most importantly, community input. It is through cooperative governance and listening to impacted communities who are often the most underserved and overlooked that we can advance policies that are responsive to their needs, the needs of my constituents in Charlestown, East Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville. I'm proud to have secured more than $80 million for Boston Logan Airport and will work to ensure this bill and those funds move us closer to quiet skies in the Massachusetts 7th. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I'm Greg Gassar, and I represent the heart of Texas. 13 years ago, I stood alongside construction workers as we sounded the alarm at Austin City Hall that workers were dying after being forced to work for hours on end in the sun without rest and without a water break. And so our community came together and passed a local protection to guarantee everyone this basic right. 5 years later, families in Dallas were mourning the losses of fathers and sons and brothers and tios who died on the job because they too were forced to work without a water break. So that community came together to pass protections to guarantee this basic right. Now, as San Antonio bears the hottest 10-day streak in recorded history, now as our globe bears the hottest days in recorded history this month, people in San Antonio want to pass those same sorts of protections. But Governor Greg Abbott signed a priority bill eliminating the right to water breaks for Texas workers beginning September 1st. People are dying like Eugene Gates and Justin Corey Foster and Felipe Pascual dying while working in the Texas heat this year. And we don't need more Texans dying in the sun. Instead, we need OSHA and the Biden administration to take immediate action and passing a federal heat protection rule, because bearing the Texas heat is brutal, but forcing workers to work in that heat is cruel. I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to celebrate the passage of Securing Growth and Robust Leadership in American Aviation Act. This achievement is the result of bipartisan efforts representing a significant step forward in transforming our nation's aviation industry while addressing the issues and delays that flyers have faced over the last year. I'm particularly delighted by provisions in the bill which specifically focus on upgrading airport infrastructure and addressing workforce shortages in the aviation sector. With increased funding for airport infrastructure upgrades, we're supporting non-hub airports like Pitt Greenville Airport, enabling them to modernize their facilities. Additionally, large airports will expand capacity, enhancing safety measures and fostering economic growth. I'm committed to ensuring the effective implementation of these policies as we continue to advocate for the measures that promote safety, economic viability, and a bright future for aviation in Eastern North Carolina and beyond. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to remove myself from co-sponsorship of H.R. 4637.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And still I rise, Madam Speaker. I rise today with a heavy heart. And I say this because of the topic that I will share with persons based on a personal experience that I had. I often say I rise in the spirit of Maya Angelou. I rise with the notion that I bring the gifts our ancestors gave. I'm the dream and the hope of the slave. That doesn't apply to me personally, but generally speaking to people of my ethnicity, my race. And I rise today with this heavy heart because of something that has haunted me since I saw it some many weeks ago. Something that haunted me to the extent that I returned to my office after having seen it and called it to the attention of my staff. And I've had a good deal of consternation in terms of how to respond and react to what I saw. So permit me to share this vignette with you and a bit of commentary thereafter. While visiting a local facility, a store in the area, I will not announce the name of the business. I can if I have to, but I'll choose not to today. While I was there for business purposes, I saw children come in. And these children, I'm going to guesstimate, 5 to 10. They came in the main entrance. They proceeded to move over to my left, their right as they came in. And they had bags. And they went up and down each aisle in the store collecting things. They proceeded to do this all the way through the store, traversing the entirety of the store. And when they arrived at the very last aisle in the store, they walked out. There was a peace officer, or what appeared to be a peace officer, an officer in uniform, standing there as they passed. They did not go to the cashier, the cash register, the person, the clerk who was collecting funds for items that were being purchased. They did not go there. They didn't go over to the self-check area. They merely walked out of the store with bags of goods that they collected while in the store. Now let me pause for a moment and say something that's important. I'll come back to the story, the vignette. There are things that happen that cause me to pray that the person who did this was not a person of color. When I hear of these dastardly deeds, there's something within me that says, God, I hope that's not a person of color. I don't want to have it be any person. I don't want to see dastardly deeds done. But because of the history of people of African ancestry in the country and how there was a time when there was a constant drumbeat to style them as persons who were doing dastardly deeds, I relate, and I just don't want to see that done. So I always pray that it's not a person of color. Don't want it to be a person to do it at all. So in this case, I happened to see this happen, and I have to tell you, these were all children of color. Now, an Anglo person saying this would probably be called a racist by somebody. I want you to know that I saw this, I'm saying this, and I believe that they were children of African ancestry. They walked out of that store, continuing with the vignette, and they did it slowly. They casually strolled through the door, not having paid for the goods that they collected as they walked up and down each aisle in that store. My mother would call that theft. The constabulary would call that theft. I call that theft. I saw the crime committed. I went over to the officer myself, and I spoke to the officer. Did you see that? And the officer responded, truthfully, he said he did. And I made an inquiry as to why the officer did not act. And the officer was very candid. He explained to me that there had been an encounter wherein an officer or someone did act, and that person was harmed, the person who tried to stop this behavior, and that they had been told that this was not something that they would make an attempt to prohibit or prevent. I was shocked. You know, I've heard about these things. I've seen things on televisions where large groups of people run into stores and take things and smash and grab and leave. But it's different when you actually see it yourself. But the story doesn't end here. After what I saw, I moved over to pay for what I had. And then 2 other children came in. This time, there was a child that may have been 9, 10 years old, maybe 12, hard to guess. But there was another child that was probably about a foot or more higher than my walking cane. Probably, in my opinion, 6, 7 years old. And this child had a bag and collected things. A baby, in my opinion, I would say a baby. Child. And when this child reached the exit near the officer, and I'm standing there, I saw it, this child looked at the officer, and the officer looked at the child. And I thought for a moment that the officer would react. And this child turned to that officer and stared, just stared the officer, as we would say in my neck of the woods, he stared the officer down. A baby. And then walked on out of the door with goods that he had not paid for. Friends, doesn't matter your color. At some point, we have to take a stand. This cannot be tolerated. Does anybody really think that these children are going to stop after that one incident? Does anybody really believe that they won't do things at some point in the future that will exceed petty theft? I'm only speculating, but my guess is that this can be the genesis of bad things to come. It has to be dealt with. We cannot allow people to take things that belong to other people with impunity. Doesn't matter the age. As a matter of fact, the younger the age gives me more concern than perhaps the older, because this is a point where children should be taught how to respect others and the property of others. And we now allow them to, with impunity, commit crimes. I'm calling this to our attention because I know what happens when people get hurt in the process of taking things. I know what happens. I know that there's going to be an allegation made if an officer should hurt somebody in the process. And I'm not saying that officers should. But at some point, we have to stop it. And you don't stop it by allowing it to continue. People cannot assume that they can just walk out of the store with the goods and not pay for them, especially children. And I've heard the many stories about how my son is a good boy. I was a judge before I came to Congress of a small claims court. I've heard the stories about how my son is a good boy, that he was with bad company. Well, that may be true. But good company or bad company, we have to teach our children to respect the property of others and to respect others. I'm bringing this to our attention because I have been told that this facility, this business place, may have to close its doors. That's a reason to call it to our attention. I'm bringing it to our attention because I don't want to see anybody get hurt. That's a good reason to call it to our attention. But I'm bringing it more so to our attention because I believe we have a moral imperative to help the generations that are to follow to understand how it is that they had the opportunity to walk into the front door of that establishment. It hasn't been that long ago that in my lifetime, I'd have to go to the back door if they allowed me in at all. Not that business, but a similar business. In my lifetime, I've had to go to the back door to get things that I ordered from within a business. They have to understand that people have suffered so that they have these opportunities and privileges that they have, so that there's equality under the law for them, so that they're not treated as second-class citizens and prevented from going into business places, such that they're not searched before they go into business places, such that they're not followed up and down the aisles of business places. I have been followed in places when I was much younger, simply because of who I was. They have to understand that Rosa Parks didn't go to jail so that they could steal from other people with impunity. Dr. King didn't have a march on Washington for this. We've got to get them to understand how it is that they have these opportunities. And we're failing to do it. We're failing to do it as long as there's one child who does what I saw. Doesn't take 10, just one. Every child is important, and we've got to reach them all, or at least make every effort that we can. We have a moral imperative to do this. They've got to understand this history. They've got to understand that their foreparents suffered and that their lives were sacrificed so that America could be the great country it is, and so that there would be a 13th Amendment, so that there would be 14th Amendment and a 15th Amendment, end slavery, get the right to vote, equality under the law. They've got to understand. And if we're not going to do it in schools, we'll have to do it in homes. I'd prefer to see it done everywhere, to be quite honest, so that everybody understands the history and the importance of knowing who you are and how it is that you have acquired this place in society that you currently hold. We're not there yet. There's still more work to be done. We have Slavery Remembrance Day coming up in August. August 20th is Slavery Remembrance Day. There will be other things associated with our history that we will do, but we cannot allow our young generation, the youngest among us, who can comprehend, to live a life without understanding the importance of knowing who they are. So I'm going to ask persons to please become a committee of one. If you know of a child that's doing this, take it upon yourself to talk to that family or to that child. I know that there are strange things and odd things happen. Sometimes people get hurt. But if you know the family, do what we had done when I was a much younger child. You committed an offense, everybody told your mother about it. Nobody would watch a child commit a crime and not go home and call around and find out whose child it was and make sure that it was reported. We cannot do this and know that it's happening and simply go on about our business. I rise today with a heavy heart. I normally would be speaking about another topic, but this was something that has haunted me since I saw it. And as a result, I had to say what I've said. I know that somebody has been offended, but I'm sorry if I did offend you. But this cannot go unnoticed, and it cannot go without a call for change. Let's make sure that we alert the schools. Let them know what's happening. We've got to talk to people in the schools, the teachers, to get to the parents, the PTAs. I'm going to do as much as I can. I'll be a committee of one, and I ask that you become a committee of one. And yes, before I close, there are persons of other ethnicities, other races that do this as well, and we don't want them doing it. They too have a history that they ought to understand. And if they truly understand it, they wouldn't engage in this kind of behavior. So let's not allow this to happen to any child. Let's become the responsible adults who will claim all children as children in need of adult supervision at all times. And let's make a difference in the lives of these children. And still I rise in the spirit of Maya Angelou, bringing the gifts my ancestors gave, the dream and hope of the slave. I yield back the balance of my time. Madam Speaker, may I claim additional time?
The gentleman may reclaim his time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, moving to another topic. I am proud to announce that we are going to have our Slavery Remembrance Day event in Houston, Texas on August the 19th. That is a Saturday. And I'm proud to announce it because the Honorable Bishop William Barber will be the speaker. And last year, President Biden recognized this event and in so doing issued a press release. I say he recognized the event. He actually recognized slavery remembrance, the enslaved, remembering them. And we, by way of press release, and we had this event, and we had more than 1,000 people to show up. So we are telling folk as best as we can that there's limited seating, and only 1,000 will be allowed into the venue to hear this great message and to hear us explain the history of Africans in the United States of America and the significant role that they have played in the development of the country, the role that they have played in helping this country become the economic powerhouse that it is today. They are the foundational mothers and fathers of, these are the persons of whom we will speak, persons of African ancestry who made great sacrifices and whose lives were sacrificed so that America could rest on the economic foundation that it resides on. Proud of this event for a multiplicity of reasons. One, we'll have an opportunity to expose the history that many people are not aware of. Two, we'll have an opportunity to tell people that they should not allow themselves to revere the enslaver and revile the enslaved. It's important for people to understand that concept. And we have to change the mindset. But most importantly, we will do this because those lives in the millions that were sacrificed over some 240 plus years, those lives must be commemorated. We have a moral imperative to do this. This should be on everyone's conscience agenda, a moral imperative to commemorate the lives that was sacrificed to make America great. I thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Flood, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today because we are at a crossroads in banking, fintech, and finance. Blockchain is a revolutionary technology that is going to change the way Americans do business. The question today, the one that we have in front of us, is whether we would like America to lead that change or let somebody else take the reins. We are planning on marking up 2 bills next week in the Financial Services Committee, one on digital assets market structure and the other on stablecoins. I'm going to focus my remarks today on stablecoins. I am not new to this subject. In the Nebraska legislature, I wrote and passed a bill that allows for banks in Nebraska to issue stablecoins, state-chartered banks. This is an issue that I have worked on and care about for years. Since 2017, stablecoins have grown to $130 billion in market cap. That's the size of a multinational institution like Deutsche Bank. We are not dealing with a theoretical conversation about stablecoins here. Stablecoins have already arrived. Whether you like them or not is irrelevant. They are here, and the question of the day is how to regulate them, not whether to regulate them at all. Now that we've covered the basic need for this legislation, let's discuss a specific issue in the bill: how to treat state-regulated institutions that want to issue a stablecoin. Our dual banking system is the envy of the world. It allows us to provide true regulatory tailoring, particularly for small community banks in our country. Were we to move away from the dual banking system, were we to essentially gut the power and the authority of the state banking regulators, like the Nebraska Department of Banking, it would be an absolute tragedy for our community banks. I do not think there's a banker around that wouldn't stand up for the dual banking system. If you're a small bank in rural Nebraska, you shouldn't receive the same scrutiny as a GSIB. If you're a small bank in rural Nebraska, you probably shouldn't share the same primary regulator as a GSIB either. The dual banking system lowers burdens on banks, but it also ensures that our small institutions have a line of communication to the entity that regulates them. If every bank had to be regulated by the OCC, I don't know that the OCC would have the bandwidth to ensure every small single bank in rural America gets the attention it needs relative to larger institutions. That's not a knock on the OCC. It's just reality. Now that brings us back to stablecoins. Chairman McHenry's bill currently has a state pathway for stablecoin issuance. Shockingly, some of the same banking organizations that hail the dual banking system seem to have a different opinion when it comes to stablecoins. Let me be very clear. If the Federal Reserve becomes the de facto regulator for all state-regulated stablecoin issuers, it would prevent small and mid-sized banks across the United States from getting into the stablecoin market. It would fly in the face of regulatory tailoring, the very concept that has promoted our current system that allows for community banks to literally exist. Our state regulators are more than capable of taking on this role. Those that argue for regulatory arbitrage miss the point. We already have a system in place that does this work. There's no reason for a state-chartered bank in Nebraska that issues stablecoins to be regulated directly by the Federal Reserve when the Nebraska Department of Banking is equipped to do the job. Further, the bill establishes a robust floor for stablecoin issuance. The most important part of that floor is the reserves. Under the bill, and listen to this, under the bill, issuers must back a stablecoin with reserves 1-to-1. Let's think about that for a moment. If a consumer has one stablecoin at $1, the issuer must hold exactly $1 in reserve on that same stablecoin. In other words, your money isn't going anywhere. The issuer cannot lend out your money. They cannot invest it in risky assets for their own gain. They must hold it in reserve as ordered by the bill that's in front of the Financial Services Committee. That requirement alone should go a long way to ease any anxieties over instability. The system itself has reserve requirements that aren't present in other parts of the financial markets. We are truly at a historic moment in the House. It's not often that we get the opportunity to build a new regulatory system from scratch. Regulating stablecoins is just that exact opportunity. It's imperative that we get it right so both the state charters and the federal charters can issue stablecoins. I thank the House for the time that I'm given today, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, is recognized for the remainder of the hour as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. I am going to yield to the gentlewoman from Florida as much time as she may consume. If she's ready, it's all yours. Madam Speaker, thank you for your patience as some of the clock, as you know, right now, all sped up on us, so we're all running around like crazy people. But Ms. Salazar, do you want to use? And
thank you very much. My little poster over here.
Okay, and which poster is Ms. Salazar? As we're finding our graphics. It may be actually still in the cloakroom. Do we have a poster for Ms. Salazar? Ms. Salazar, go ahead and start, and we'll...
Let me ask my voice. They are outside.
Go and check outside the door. And Madam Speaker Pro Tem, reclaiming the time for a moment as she's looking for her poster. We're going to use most of the remaining portion of the hour when we start. We're going to cover a lot of territory. And so for the poor folks that have to try to keep, just please wave at me if I start speaking too quickly. You never seem willing to throw something at me. Madam Speaker, I'm going to one more time yield as much time as she will consume, because it looks like we found a poster for the gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. He had one of the finest pens in the Cuban exile community in its 60 years of banishment from the island. There are very few writers who could capture the suffering of the Cuban people, a country which has paid the consequences of believing in a toxic political idea. This was a man who could warn the rest of Latin America what would happen if they followed and believed Fidel Castro's false promises. His name was Carlos Alberto Montaner, and he just passed at 80 years old. His great political mission was to see a liberated Cuba. I wonder how many people like him have died waiting for the island to be freed from the jaws of communism. Thousands upon thousands. How will he be remembered? We will remember him as a good man, a decent man, kind and humble. His only preoccupation was to deliver a message of freedom to the Cubans and to his Latin American fellow men. His articles were impeccable, profound, and yet accessible to anyone to understand. They were full of content and historical analysis, thoroughly explaining the falsehoods that communism promises and never delivers. Montaner's book, called The Manual for the Perfect Latin American Idiot, is a classic. It is a guide for Latin Americans to avoid falling for communist tricks, to avoid falling for what Fidel Castro has promised this hemisphere. The reality is that the 20 most developed countries in the world are capitalist democracies. They have free markets, they have freedom of expression, small government, where the individual is allowed to decide their fate rather than some unknown bureaucrat in a distant government office. The government serves only to establish the rules of the game. The winner is decided by whomever plays it best. Montaner was my teacher. I read his articles meticulously, taking notes on his best ideas. I learned so much from his analysis, not just for their brilliance, but also because they were full of goodwill for his compatriots, full of freedom. It was an honor to know him, to interview him, to be his friend. We will miss him, and I offer my deepest condolences to his widow, Linda, and to his daughter, Gina. In the future, democratic leaders of a liberated Cuba will owe Montaner a special place in the island's conscience. He helped pave the road to the idea that democracy is the best system for humanity. May God cover him with his glory, for he acted with purpose and honor in his time on earth, always working for the love of his Latin American family and admiring the American agenda. I yield back. Thank you.
Madam Speaker Pro Tem, as reclaiming my time, and to Ms. Salazar, I apologize for having us all have to speed up our clock here. It's sometimes just the nature of when someone else on the Democrat side cut their time short and didn't show up. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, as we start to go, we're going to walk through a couple things here. Part of this is actually going to be something I don't get to do that often. It's going to be actually optimistic, with a potential solution that will functionally soak myself in kerosene and play with matches. But I come here every week and I'm incredibly terrified, I'm incredibly dour on what's happening in debt. So let's actually first set up part of this conversation. We are borrowing in the last 12 months, anyone want to give me a guess, how much do we borrow per second? Per second in the last 12 months. $63,000 per second is what the United States federal government is borrowing. And if you start to actually dig into it deeper, when you start to see stories popping up of cities like Chicago with $35 billion debt crisis coming, that $63,000 of borrowing is just the federal government. That does not include a bunch of the other types of pension obligations, which are another, I think we had one that was showing another couple dozen $1 trillion of obligations. Now do municipal debt. Now do state pension debt. Do understand the debt monster is not just the fact that the United States functionally right now has, what, $32.5 trillion, and out of that, 26 trillion of that is publicly borrowed. That difference we try to explain is when the Treasury borrows from the trust funds, and the trust funds are given, so you're the Railroad Retirement Trust Fund, the Social Security Trust Fund. They're given sort of IOUs, but they're paid interest. And they have a functionally a negotiable security that can only be cashed in with Treasury. So if anyone says, well, they stole the money, that's just not true. They just interborrowed, but they have the obligation. But in the coming weeks, probably when we get back from August, we're going to do a presentation on just the scale of borrowing. Do you remember the debates we had here on the floor, 2 years ago, of the multi-employer pension systems that were bankrupt? They had no money. And the brain trust around here, instead of fixing them, we just said, here's $135 billion. Here's lots of cash. Except even that money now has been pretty much burnt up. We have a crisis. Much of the political leaders, union leaders, others from the 70s, 80s, 90s were unwilling to tell workers, we need to set aside more money to cover these costs. And then the other thing we didn't prepare for, healthcare costs. So I'm going to show in here just the scale from today through 30 years, best calculation without using the new interest rates on debt as we've had the last year, it's about $130 trillion of borrowing coming. Every dime of that is demographics. 75% of that $130 trillion is the shortfall of Medicare. The other 25% is if we backfill Social Security. Because remember, in 8.5, 9 years, Social Security Trust Fund is chewed up. It's gone. And seniors take a 25% cut in their check, and we double poverty in the senior population in America. And it's immoral, but once again, we have no partners here to actually work on it. If you actually go into many of our home districts right now, they're running ads, the Democrats are running ads saying, David Schweikert is willing to talk about Social Security trying to save it. He's a horrible human being. And they're doing this because they care more about winning the political debate than saving it. It's just immoral. And then something started to happen the last 2 weeks, and I just brought one of them because the number of times the handful of us here who actually care about debt have almost been mocked. And then something happened. Suddenly, we have some of the most leftist publications in America. I mean, here's The Atlantic. It turns out that debt matters after all. What's happening? Our brothers and sisters on the left all of a sudden had an epiphany going, oh, God. Maybe what some of those people on the right have been saying that it's out of control. Did I mention $63,000 a second? The debate used to be you'd come behind the microphones and say, don't you care about your grandkids? Then the math got so bad, we started to come and say, well, don't you care about your kids? And it was shocking. It was just shocking the input we'd get. We'd often get seniors saying, nah, screw them. I hope that's just a tiny, tiny, tiny part of the population. But you would be just taken back of some of the inbound to our office when we talk about what was happening in debt and that it was demographics. Demographics aren't Republican and Democrat. But now the math has gotten so bad, it's no longer your grandkids, your kids, it's now you and I. It's those of us who will be heading into retirement. It's us. I'm going to show here some of the outside estimates on how bad the math is. And if any of those outside estimates are accurate, in 9 years, this place is a basket case. There's one estimate done by Bloomberg Intelligence, and they have a really sophisticated model. They have some top-end economists, and they're saying it's not the 115% of debt to GDP that Congressional Budget Office. They say if their model is correct, it's like 130% of debt to GDP, meaning just interest cost 10 years from now is a couple $1 trillion a year. The other punchline, I came here last week and we were trying to recalculate what the Supreme Court's decision in regards to student loans meant, and was that going to be a placeholder to move up and down some of the debt numbers. We basically took what Treasury was saying and we couldn't make the math work. So we spent a couple days saying, okay, if we take the historic of the last quarter we're in of the fiscal year and say, here's the tax receipts we typically get, here's the spending we typically get, we will borrow more money this year than all of defense and all of discretionary. So I take back what I said last week saying, hey, we might be getting a bit of a reprieve. It doesn't look like the reprieve is actually in that math. One of the models, if you use the mean number, not the outliers, the mean, it basically says we will borrow more money than every dime of what you think of as government. All defense and all of discretionary. That's what we get to vote on. Will be on borrowed money. We were not supposed to be hitting numbers like that for a few more years. And it's a combination of multiple things. Healthcare costs have exploded. We know, because we've documented this one, in the first 7 months of the year, Medicare went up 16%. Spending on Medicare went up 16%. Interest is up dramatically. Next year, just interest will be functionally $750 billion. How many people have you had talk about it that interest in just 4 or 5 years will be bigger than all the defense? And then tax receipts have started because this great Biden economic economy, well, the tax receipts are starting to collapse. Because you don't go and sell assets and pay capital gains when your capital gains are mostly inflation. The wheels are coming off, people, and we need to take it seriously. So let's actually do a couple of our boards here and just sort of set up what we see happening, and then we're going to walk through something that's semi-hopeful. We always start with this chart, and one day I will actually update it because it's now almost 2 years old. But for anyone watching, you see the red, mandatory. That's on autopilot. You see the green and the blue? Okay, let's just pretend that's like 26, 27% of all of our spending. This right here, this year, every dime of that's borrowed. Your government, if you think the State Department, your poverty program, this, that, you care about, if it's not in the mandatory, it's borrowed money. And so the brain trust around here that will come in and say, well, if you just get rid of foreign aid's about 12 days of borrowing. You can make an argument saying, we need to think about ourselves. Ukrainian funding. Okay, whether you're for it or against it, it's functionally might be 3 weeks of borrowing in an entire year. And now we're actually working on the budgets, and this is just a placeholder. When you have someone tell you saying, we're holding discretionary spending flat, well, we're holding it flat from the couple pandemic years, which were incredible spikes. But if you actually do the right way to look at a spending chart, go pick a base year, add in inflation, what does that curve look like? Non-defense discretionary is up 154% if you use 1990 as your base year and just say, here's inflation, here's what the line would look like if we held it steady, but it's up 159%. Defense is only up 35% over inflation trend line. Just worth And I get more crap for showing this board because the poor folks who are having to try to build the budgets and the hallways in this place being full of people begging for more cash. But there's no cash. Understand, it's all borrowed right now. The trust funds. So you come in here and say, Social Security Trust Fund is gone in the 10-year window. It's all gone. The Highway Transportation Fund is gone in 4 years. So the Highway Trust Fund, all that money is gone. The Medicare Trust Fund is actually gone about a year before the Social Security Trust Fund, meaning the whole Part A Medicare Trust Fund, the whole hospital portion, which is it's close to about 40% of all Medicare funding, the trust fund is gone. All these are empty and functionally within this 9-year window.
If the gentleman would suspend for just a moment. The chair will receive a message.
Madam Speaker, messages from the Senate.
Madam Speaker.
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed S-70, an act to require the Bureau of Indian Affairs to process and complete all mortgage packages in association with residential and business mortgages on Indian land by certain deadlines and for other purposes in which concurrence of the House is requested.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. It's always important when the Senate actually passes something. Sorry, 10 seconds of levity. When you become a freshman here, you probably had the same thing. You sit down, and it's always a member from Texas. Did you notice? They plop down next to you and go, David, our freshman member of Congress, you see them on that side. They're Democrats. That's your opposition. Your true enemy is down the hall. It's called the Senate. And that joke has been here for like 200 years. All right, back to being serious. I just showed you a chart that the trust funds are gone in the 10 years. We will need not hundreds of billions, trillions to backfill, particularly when you put in the Social Security Trust Fund. How much discussion do you hear? Instead, you see it used as advertising. We had a president that got behind that podium there and basically said, you're not allowed to talk about Medicare or Social Security. And the room applauded. And a number of us who had spent the last year of our lives trying to find a way to save it, Republicans and Democrats. Remember, when the president gave his State of the Union, he knifed a number of Democrat senators, too, who had been willing to have an honest conversation on how we were going to do the moral thing and save Social Security. But it was just too tasty of a political issue. So then you get this. I get this question often when I'm talking about U.S. sovereign debt. Yes, but all of our debt is owned by China. It's not true. Number one holder of U.S. sovereign debt is Japan. It's a little over $1 trillion. Out of that, 26 trillion that's publicly held. That's not inter-transfers. China now, and for the last several years, has been dialing back their U.S. sovereigns. Meaning today, China holds about $800 billion. And you actually go down, this is the reality. The rest of the world has been slowly, over the last few years, backing away from buying U.S. sovereign debt. What do we know that Americans don't know? Why have they decided we're not that safe of an investment? Is it because the United States does sanctions? Is it because of our creditworthiness? But the fact of the matter is foreign holdings of U.S. debt continues to fall, meaning we as U.S. savers have to finance that $63,000 we're borrowing every second. Much more of that today we have to finance with our savings. And then you have the insane policies that this place did over the previous couple years when the left controlled it. You know, when you had a Democrat House, Democrat Senate, Democrat President. Do you remember the Inflation Reduction Act? Insane name. Had nothing to do with reducing inflation. It was spending money. It kept inflation going. But about 2 hours ago, the Wall Street Journal published an analysis of these grants that they're giving away to big industries. Now, they're in the clean energy industries, but they're still really big industries. Well, it turns out the vast majority of the cash this government's giving out from last year's Inflation Reduction Act is going to foreign companies. Yep, our taxpayer dollars that were supposed to help us build a U.S. clean industry or clean energy industry functionally structure, 60% of clean energy projects awarded from the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, are foreign-owned businesses. Yay, policy! So you see we're borrowing $63,000 a second. We have crushing our kids, our grandkids, and many of your own retirements because they're the ones that have to pay this debt back. And we're doing projects funded by last year's legislation that was only supposed to cost about $280 billion only. And then Goldman Sachs comes in and says, nah, the spending on all these grants and these giveaways and this, these supplements function could be $1.2 trillion. CBO comes in and doubles their estimate. And now we find 60% of that money is going to foreign companies. This is not what we were promised. The president, the Democrats promised us this was to create a U.S.-based infrastructure for clean energy, except the vast majority of their money, our money, is now going to foreign companies. Great job, guys. And it just gets worse because now we're starting to look at what's going on interest. Do you understand how, I'm sorry, I'm trying not to be a jerk. There's a concept of fragility. How many of you have ever, I'll use an example from Taleb's book a couple years ago. How many of you, you're going to go to school? For young people it might be here, or those of us who have to go to the airport, and if you leave at this time, you're always going to get there. Except that one time out of 10, there's a car accident, and boom, you miss your airplane, you miss getting to class. The concept is fragility. If you squeeze it too tight, just-in-time inventories, at some moment something breaks, and that one time you miss the airplane, is it worth all the other times that you got 5 extra minutes at home drinking coffee? Interest, in a weird way, is the same concept. Things are wonderful until they're not. Next year, we are estimated to borrow almost $750 billion. None of that buys anything. It doesn't buy you a new bridge. It doesn't buy you a new program. It doesn't help you fund education. All that's just paying bondholders back. $750 billion next year. But one of the things that this chart is trying to show is if you actually go out and then look at some of the higher interest rate possibilities, the math says a single point higher interest than what Congressional Budget Office was estimating a year ago. Over the 30 years, it's $30 trillion. 2 points higher interest over that time. Actually, it's closer to like 25, 27 years. Every dime of U.S. tax receipts goes to cover interest. There's no more government. That's called fragility. You become subject to the whims of the debt markets. And now this chart is starting to show we're over here. Here's our historic. And all of a sudden, what happens to the cost of these programs with just simple marginal increases in interest. So when I talk about that $30 trillion, and you're going to show it to you in a chart in a moment, how much of the financing of Medicare is actually not delivery of health care. It's actually the financing of the debt that financed the last increment of that Medicare. And this is the chart that should scare you to death when you start to realize that if you had 3% higher, which isn't, go back 20 years ago, this was a normal, these types of interest rates were normal for U.S. debt. In that 30-year window, you have over 345% of debt to the size of the economy. You got to understand that this isn't a game. We're already right now at 100% of debt to GDP. The wheels are coming off, and we're going to dink around with little arguments saying, well, I have an idea. We're going to work on it all year, and our big success, we're going to save 0.5% on Medicare spending. We've lost our minds around here. our unwillingness to do the things that are difficult because we got to explain it to a reporter. It's going to be an attack ad in one of our campaigns. This is the end of your republic. This basically means you will live in a country with functionally no growth, and functionally every incremental dollar you have is trying to just cover the interest, the borrowing costs of your country. And it's not tax receipts. We have chart after chart after chart after chart that demonstrates it's spending. It's mostly demographics. We got old. A bit of trivia. 1970s, when I was a child, yes, I've gotten that old, for every dollar it went to seniors, $5 went to young people. Today, it's just reversed. For every dollar it goes to young people, $5 goes to seniors. It's not actually a policy shift. Healthcare got dramatically more expensive. It's out of control. We cannot afford it. But also our demographics changed rapidly. Last year, we had 1.67 fertility rate, meaning this country will have more deaths in 18 years than births. Half the states in this country today have more deaths than births. It's demographics. We're not having children. And this started back in 1990. This didn't just happen yesterday. The fertility rate started to collapse in 1990. They just accelerated the last couple years. Next year, 12,000 Americans a day turn 65. 12,000 Americans turn 65 a day next year. And our hallways will be full of people begging for more cash. I can't even figure out how to finance what our current obligations are. And you start to look at the reality of the money. Deficit projections. This is important to understand when I say the wheels are coming off. So let's go way back in history. May 22, so about a year ago. We were supposed to borrow $980 billion this year. $980 billion. Today, our latest adjustment on the expectation. So a year ago, we were going to borrow $980 billion. What happened? Why is that number doubled? So within 1 year, we went from 980 to now we're estimating $1.84 trillion this year. What happened in 12 months? Well, you got some of the Democrat tax policy, which turns out is not raising any money and is actually slowing down parts of the growth in the economy. We're building factories like crazy with subsidized tax money that we have no workers for and there's no customers for. That's going to be brilliant. Well, and the best part, that money, as I just showed you, 60% of it is going to foreign-owned companies. Brilliant. But this is pretty much a math-free zone. So this is the one, and I keep showing this one because it's almost, I almost have bad dreams about this one. And I should disclose, I have a 1-year-old. I have a 7-year-old. Matter of fact, my 7-year-old's here in Washington with me this week. What's their right? What do they get in the future? Because today the math basically says in 23 years, all U.S. taxes have to have doubled. All U.S. taxes will have to double in that 23-year window just to maintain baseline services. So when my little people are out of their postdoctorates, because I have high anticipation for them, they're going to walk into an economy that looks nothing like what we have today. How many of you intend to still be alive 20 years from now? Are you ready to live in a country where all your taxes will have doubled? Everything. That's the math. We can keep pretending it doesn't exist, but the math will always win. And what was so terrifying we did here is when we did the debt ceiling deal, we functionally went from, hey, we're projecting to head towards 120, 119% of debt to GDP at the end of the 10-year window. Say, hey, we're going to get it down to maybe 114, 115. That's actually real money. That's $100 billion a year. So right now we spend about $700 billion this fiscal year, $700 billion in non-defense discretionary, and we're going to remove $100 billion of that. That's real money. Because no one here actually does economics, they also don't understand when you remove that $100 billion, you got to do it. You don't have a choice. The wheels are coming off. But you also slow down the economy by about 0.5% of GDP if you have not adopted other pro-growth policies, whether it be you're fixing parts of immigration, where you're fixing parts of the tax code, you're fixing parts of regulation. But without it, when you're doing the very cuts that you have to do, you also affect the growth of the economy. And so the really smart economists come in here and do the math, and Moody's comes in and says, yeah, at the end of the 10 years where you're going demographics, the healthcare costs skyrocketing, higher interest rates, we don't think you're going to be down to 114, 115% of debt to GDP. We think you're going to be at 120% of debt to GDP. Okay? If you do the math, that basically means your interest cost is probably $1.25 trillion a year. So you're going to spend that sort of money to get nothing, just pay the bondholders. But then the one that takes your breath away is the Moody's the Bloomberg Intelligence folks ran their model and their economists. And they said, hey, we see at the end of the 10-year window, you're going to be at 130% of debt to GDP. If you do the math, when you're holding that sort of debt to GDP, that's like $2 trillion a year in just interest. Okay, pay attention with me. $2 trillion just in interest. I told you that this year every dime of discretionary is going to be borrowed. At that time, equal to almost every dime of discretionary, the discretionary will have grown a bit, but stayed fairly flat. Will be pretty much just interest, meaning the borrowing 10-year window from now will have to be like $2.7 trillion in a year. I mean, this is functioning 9 budget years from now. Dear heaven, I hope this number is wrong, but they walk you through the math saying you're going to have this many baby boomers in their benefit years. Because of that movement demographically, the economy is going to slow down. Because of what cuts you're having to do, the economy is going to have slowed down. The higher interest rates of financing is going to cost this much. And we're terrified to tell our voters this, because our voters get all upset and say, well, if you just got rid of waste and fraud and foreign aid, you'd be fine. Or for the brain trust on the left, if you would just raise taxes on the 2% of the population that makes $400,000, we'll finance it. And I showed last week, that's all fantasy. You don't get anything close to it. But the political class here relies on the fact that our voters don't care about the math. Our interest cost just this year is up 40%. That's a punchline. So what we budgeted, remember, we were only going to borrow $980 billion only this year. Now we look like we're going to borrow $1.84 trillion. One of the drivers in that is our interest cost is up 40% this year. How many people do you hear even bothering to tell you the truth? And this is the board that also gets me in trouble all the time because it's also 2 years old. The numbers are much worse. It's no longer 116 trillion, it's about 130 trillion of debt. 100% of the next 30 years of debt is, I've already said it twice in this, anyone listening? 75% is the shortfall of Medicare. We don't have enough money for it. And the other 25% is if we backfill Social Security. Because remember, in functionally 9 years, the Social Security Trust Fund is empty. And this is before this inflation interest rate cycle, this math was done. And you start to look at this, and you understand how much is the direct spending, how much is the interest cost of financing those sorts of debt. This is $130 trillion of borrowing over the next 30 years, and it's all demographics. We got old. Pay attention, we're going to come back to this concept of if the vast majority of our borrowing, of our debt, is health care. We're going to get to a couple points where we're going to have the willingness to talk about the drivers of that spending. So, JEC, Joint Economic Committee, the Republican side, which I'm the senior Republican, Medicare spending will double. FY23, it's $1 trillion. 10 years, we functionally go to $3 trillion. We're going to functionally add, over the 10 years, $22 trillion of, you get it? Is anyone looking? Medicare. This is not Medicaid. This is not Indian Health Service. This is not VA. It's just Medicare. $22 trillion in that 10 years. And look in the hallways of this place, and it's lined up with people who are wonderful. They're smart. They work hard. They care about their patients. And it's more money. And we're trying to figure out the wheels are falling off, and is anyone willing to tell them the truth? Oh, sorry about that. JEC estimates, and this is where I'm about now to soak myself in kerosene and light myself on fire, because apparently we're not allowed to actually talk to people and tell the truth. We've been writing the Republican side of the Joint Economic Committee report now for a couple months. There's functionally 5 PhD economists. There's an idiot like me doing some of the math, working on it. And we're trying to figure out what moral approach can we do to save the country from the debt crisis that is here. Did I mention $63,000 a second we're borrowing this last 12 months? And there's a chapter 3 in here. And this chapter may get me unelected. But we calculated the cost of obesity. I can't tell you how many members here are terrified when I start to want to even have a conversation, what we're seeing in the math. But we know diabetes, most just functioning type 2, diabetes is 33% of all healthcare spending. We know our brothers and sisters out there that have multiple comorbidities, that 5% of the population is over 50% of all of our healthcare spend. I've shown you chart after chart after chart here showing healthcare is the driver of our debt. And we got 5% of our brothers and sisters who are really sick, and the most common morbidity within that population is obesity. Of the 4,000 human diseases, and I have this one really well documented, 4,000 functioning, 2,000 are related to obesity. So 2 out of the 4,000. Are we willing to basically have a moment of honesty? I'm going to show you a couple charts here. We're in trouble. Have you seen the latest obesity statistics of our kids? Have you seen the numbers of how many Americans are dying? It's immoral that we're terrified to talk about this. And you're going to see in the report, because we spent a lot of time working on the math, and they wouldn't let us use some of the more optimistic math because it wasn't properly vetted. So we had to find peer-reviewed studies with lots of math and that could be recalculated and done. But we're looking at if we could stabilize the sickest in our obese population, both with productivity, because you get to come back into society and work, but also the healthcare costs associated, it's a few $1 trillion in the 10-year window. There is a moral path to save us from the crushing debt. Are we willing to adopt policy that basically says we love and care for people and we'd like them to live for a while? We'd like them to not be miserable all the time. But are we willing to discuss the Farm Bill? Are we willing to actually discuss the technologies that are out there right now, whether watch, which actually has blood glucose, or the portable blood glucose monitor you can stick on yourself? Are we willing to have, and I'm going to show you a board here that talks about the GLP-1s, and this is not even with actually the new generation that's coming out, where FDA approves first cellular therapy for type 1 diabetes. First one's now actually approved. it gets the body to start producing islet cells again. It's here, and there's actually 4 or 5 others in phase 1 right now. Maybe we are on the cusp of technology miracles. The dear Lord gave us the ability to think, and it turns out really smart people are giving us a path. Are we willing to be smart enough? Joint Economic Committee estimates related projections. 12.3% of the 33 trillion, 1 out of every 8, functionally is that spending is directly related to obesity. And that's the most conservative of the numbers. Obesity risk. I mean, you all know this. I'm showing stuff people know. We all know it. I mean, heart. You know, the one in, I mean, what is it? 1 in 12 cancers. The number of human misery that's directly associated. And now we get into some of the more uncomfortable things to talk about. Life expectancy. For 18 years old and up, given their BMI class. So, and look, we all know there's controversy on the body mass index, but we have lots of data around it. And if you care about people and what's happening in society, because remember, functionally the last 4 years, Americans' life expectancy has gone down. We are dying younger, and even when you remove COVID, and even then try to take a look, so for our prime age working, particularly prime age working males, we have a data set I presented here a couple weeks ago that just shocked me. It turned out that it wasn't drugs. Now, drugs was really close. It was actually obesity was killing more of our brothers in America. I didn't have a female data set to look at. How many of us are willing to actually say, wow, so if we would actually take on the drug problem and the obesity problem, we would add how many years of longevity to Americans' lives? That's moral. And also, it's really good economics. And we can see when we start to see some of these numbers where 81 was someone with healthy down to 72, so they're losing almost a decade of their lives. And you get into some of our minority populations and the numbers are even uglier. So my brothers and sisters that keep coming here and saying, let's talk about income inequality. Turns out some of the data says health, taking on diabetes, hypertension, obesity, may be the single most moral, fast, and economically rational path if you care about income inequality. You just got to be prepared for the armies of lobbyists who we're about to change. If we did these things and actually took it on, we would be changing their business models. Thank you. Look, the numbers going off the charts. This one actually just came out, I think, about 48 hours ago. The projections over the rest of this decade of how many of our young people, when we're starting to see some numbers where we're heading towards a time where half, at the end of the decade, where half of our young people are technically obese. This is a country that took on smoking and saved how many lives? We have seatbelts, we have airbags. We did it because it made us safer, healthier. We got to live longer. When you're seeing a new study out, and it's a good study, and it's detailed, and it's a huge data set, and saying, hey, at the current rate, in about a decade, half of our young people, are we willing to take this on? Because just the economics, just the lifespan, healthcare costs, you are going to see things in our joint economic report if it gets passed. It's not a report till it's passed by the committee, and I hope I can get the votes of my fellow members on the committee to support what we wrote. But if it becomes an official report, you're going to see in there stunning amounts of money for those of us who sound like accountants on steroids that we would save
by being healthier, but then you have the other side. But look at longevity. Look at the ability to participate in society. Look at the ability to have family formation. This is as close as I've come up with for unified theory of what we could do to save ourselves. And how many other idiots are going to be like me and get behind the microphone and be willing to talk about this and get ready for the television ads? He was willing to talk about this. And here's some of the punchline. I believe this number is dramatically too low. But we're coming up with math that says, look, just the use of the GLP-1s for some of the highest BMI segments, potentially hundreds of billions of dollars of savings. And that's without the economic effect, and that's also without the long-term health effects that are outside that 10-year window. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, I appreciate you sitting there, letting me go through this. I'm trying to make a point. Instead of coming to this mic every week after week after week saying there's something horribly wrong in the debt data, it's getting worse dramatically faster. People don't understand how fragile we're becoming as a society because of the threats that debt means. I'm going to try to be better. I'm going to try to demonstrate there is hope. There is a path. This is only one of about 4 key things I believe we could do to become a much more prosperous society with dramatically, we're not going to pay off the debt, but we could stabilize it. There's hope. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, but is anyone listening? I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 30 minutes.
Thank you. I'm going to address a topic I've addressed before this time of the week, but it was brought up again yesterday in the Oversight Committee entirely inappropriately. It is something that is brought up with each authorization bill or appropriation bill. And it is apparent that the other side of the aisle desperately wants a new bureaucracy dealing with what I'll call preferences. It has been in the news lately because there was a Supreme Court decision saying that for the first time in 50 years in the United States we could not discriminate or use, I guess they were primarily focusing on race, but they could have used sex as well, in university admissions, and it put an end to 50 years of discrimination at universities. It has also been in the paper because we have a Secretary of Labor appointed, not yet confirmed, that believes that this country was built on white supremacy, and we have a proposed new head of the Joint Chiefs who believes that that we should cap the number of white male officers at 42%. Of course, this gets into other areas as well that the court did not touch. It gets involved in the area of government hiring. It gets in the area of hiring by businesses that do business with the government. I think a lot of Americans are not aware that if you have at least 50 employees and do business with the government, you're required to submit a statement every year to the government called the EO1, listing the race and sex and the amount of money all your employees make. It also goes into play with government contracting, and frequently government contracts are reserved for certain people. It will continue to be an issue, as even after this decision, individual universities have gone down the path of not using tests for admissions. Historically, for example, to get into medical school, you had to pass a test called the MCAT test. I'd always felt when I was in my teens and 20s that we had the smartest kids go on to become doctors, but the medical schools are shifting away from tests, which are an objective measure of intelligence, and using things like essays to determine who the next doctor is. I want to make several comments about this preference idea and why it's so important as we work through our authorizing bills and our appropriation bills that we do not slide into this. First of all, for people who claim, like our Secretary of Labor, that we are a racist country or Eurocentric country, I want to point out that the most successful ethnic group in America today are people from India. The second most successful are people from the Philippines. Other groups like Chinese, Japanese, if you look at Latin America, Cubans, are all more successful than the average American, at least judged by income earned. According to Thomas Sowell, the children of immigrants from the West Indies, the children of immigrants from, say, Jamaica or the Bahamas are more successful than the native-born. If all these people come here and are successful, why in the world would we want the government sticking their nose in and establishing a whole new bureaucracy? I also had an experience over the weekend with regard to the Hmong. The Hmong are perhaps the largest number of so-called minorities in my district. And I talked to a lot of the Hmong at their festivals. It's always enjoyable to be at their festivals. It gives me a chance to eat Hmong food, which allows me to become more used to very hot food. But it's always enjoyable to see such happy people as the Hmong are in their festivals, and they had a festival in Sheboygan last week. But one of the things I like to ask about the Hmong, since if there was ever a group that would have felt like a minority when they came here, it would be the Hmong. Obviously not European. When they came here, they didn't know the language. But I ask either the older generation how many children plus nieces or nephews they have, and they all smile. When they get done adding it up, it seems like it's 30 or 40. I ask if any of them had any trouble with the law. No. Do all of them graduate from high school? Yes. Do all of them have jobs? Do all those that have children, were the children all with a mother and father at home? The answer is yes. I find the same thing when I ask the younger generation. And I ask them about their siblings or their cousins, and they have to add up in their mind how many there are. Could be 30, 35, 40. All of them have had no problem with the law. All of them, when they have children, there's a father in the house. All of them are living the American dream. And again, it drives home the idea that in America, we do not have a problem in which we have a European class that is preventing other people from succeeding. Indeed, the new people who come here do better than the people who've been here all along. That would be one indication that we do not need these new bureaucrats running around labeling people by their racial background. The next thing I'll point out that inevitably all of these programs have what I'll refer to as stupid rules. Let us determine, for example, who is an Hispanic in need of help. If my ancestors were in Spain, came to Cuba for a couple generations, and then moved to the United States, they would be considered Hispanic in need of help. If my ancestors lived in Spain and came from the United States, They would not need help. They would not be considered a group in need of preferences. If you are, for example, 1/4 Native American and 1/4 Hispanic, and the rest, say, English or German, you would again be considered a minority. A minority in need of help even though nobody in your life even knew what your ancestry was. But according to the diversity bureaucrats, you get to check off a box and are in need of special help. There are a variety of reasons they claim we need affirmative action. One of them is to make up for past injustices. But all of these ethnic programs, or whatever we want to call them, apply to people who just moved to the United States. Does it make any sense to say someone who moved here directly from Morocco or Nigeria or Haiti gets preferences when they had nothing bad happen to them in America? As a matter of fact, it's even more ridiculous than that. They get preferences over the native born. So for the purposes of filling out the form, if I move here from Peru and not even am a citizen, but have a green card, I get preferences over a person who's lived in America all along. Obviously, a potential for a lot of divisiveness. Also along these lines, there are two rationales. One rationale is we have to make up for past injustices, which makes no sense when you're giving preferences to people who just moved here. But the other one is supposedly to show diversity. Now, let's look at our examples again. If I moved here, or my ancestors moved here from Cuba, I don't know any Spanish. I've never been to a Spanish-speaking country. I have grown up in a northern suburb in the United States. What diversity do I bring to any company? What diversity do I bring to any school? I bring no diversity at all. I don't know why that's not talked about by people who want to push these programs. As I mentioned, these programs also affect grants given or who gets government contracts. The government sticks their nose in, and if a husband owns a business, he's penalized. If a wife owns the business, that may be considered good and creating diversity. Is that fair? They both have similar backgrounds. It does encourage lying and crookedness in America, as you run across people who put their business in the wife's name so they can get the government contract. But is that something we want to do? I don't think so. Nevertheless, that's an inevitable result of this diversity. The next question that has to be brought up is, for a lot of jobs, probably for the vast majority of jobs, is ethnic diversity really something that matters? If we're hiring a new engineer, if we're hiring a new brain surgeon, does it matter whether you're from China or Cuba or Morocco or Poland? You want the best person, the one who's done best in school, the one who's demonstrated just an innate intelligence to do these jobs. Diversity, or where your ancestors came from, does not help as well. Now, let's look at another big reason why it's important that the Republican Party fight these diversity bureaucrats every step of the way. These diversity bureaucrats have to justify their job. And to justify their job, they will do things like have little classes in diversity in their businesses or colleges or governmental areas. And these diversity bureaucrats, to justify their existence, will tell young people or older people that there is a huge amount of racism in America and they need the diversity bureaucrats to even things out. This is one way to destroy America. You are going to cause people to walk around with a chip on their shoulder who should not be walking around with a chip on their shoulder. Worse, you are going to be dividing America. And one of the things I think that's made America so great is, out of many one, e pluribus unum. The diversity bureaucrats want to go the other way. They do not want people from all around the world considering themselves one united group. The diversity bureaucrats want to take what was one united group, tear it apart, and have people angry at each other or fighting with each other. This does not work anywhere else in the world. When I read about elections in other parts of the world, one thing that makes them so contentious, sometimes violence connected with them, is that the elections become a contest between two different groups. You look at what's happened in Sri Lanka over a period of years between the two big groups there. What has happened in Nigeria between the different tribes there. Of course, in the 70s, it wound up in tens of thousands of people dying as the ethnic groups or the tribes in Nigeria separated and wind up fighting. Why in the world would we want elections in America to be a contest between groups? But that is sadly what these bureaucracies are going to want. I will close with a couple anecdotes so people back home know what's going on in America. I know somebody who worked for a manufacturing firm, and that manufacturing firm had, I believe it was, 4 engineers. They all were men. They had to hire a 5th engineer, and they were told by their diversity, the diversity firm they contracted out with, that their 5th hire had to be a woman. It didn't matter if they had found a perfectly good candidate for the job. They were afraid that the government would come in and penalize them in some fashion or audit them if the next person was not a woman. That clearly is not right. The same company hired or was going to hire a new person in management, and their first 4 or 5 members of management were all European in descent. They were told they had to go out of the way to hire somebody who wasn't European in management, rather than just taking the best person that they could. I don't think most Americans would agree with that sort of thing, but that's what's been going on in America for the last 50 years. I strongly encourage the Republican Party to draw a line in the sand. Joe Biden wants to insert these bureaucrats in all government agencies, and they will stick their nose in hiring decisions, in promoting decisions. They will stick their nose in who gets grants around the country. This is a way to divide America. America has become the greatest country of the world by viewing people as individuals. We should keep viewing people as individuals. We do not need bureaucracy or diversity bureaucrats throughout our government. I encourage all members of this body to treat everybody equally and look at everybody as an individual, not as a representative of where their ancestors came from years and years ago. Thank you, and I'll move to adjourn.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 11 a.m. on Monday, July 24th, 2023.